Today's project is this lovely, classy knitted handbag. We're going to walk through each step of the way as we work through this beautiful bag. So let's pick out some beautiful cotton yarn and get started. Hello, this is Jacqueline from Jack Knits, and let's get started on knitting this really cute handbag. We are going to be using a cotton yarn. It's a worsted weight yarn, but we're going to be using 2 strands held together to make for a nice, thick, dense fabric. And I'm also using a pretty small needle. I'm going to be using a US size 5 needle for this. I'm using a circular needle, but I am using a circular needle just like a flat needle. We're going to be knitting this flat back and forth. And the reason I'm using such a small needle for a double strand yarn, a pretty thick weight, is that I want my finished fabric to be pretty dense for a purse. I don't want a lot of little holes and gaps so that things can poke through when you put things in your purse. So that's why we're using such a small needle. I'll have lists of the other materials that you need as well listed on the side of the video. So let's get started. We are going to start first by knitting a bunch of ribbing stitches. Then we're going to go into this linen stitch here, then go back to the ribbing stitch. We're going to fold those ends together, seam up the sides, and add a strap. So we're going to go through all of those steps together, so don't worry if you're unfamiliar with how to do that. We're going to go through each step together. So we're going to start by casting on stitches onto our circular needle here, or you can use a flat straight needle as well. Remember, we're holding 2 strands together. We're going to be just using the long tail cast on method for this. If you need a refresher on the long tail, there'll be a link in the upper right hand corner, and I'll also have one in the description below. We are also going to give ourselves an extra long tail to start our project because I want to use that tail to sew my sides of the fabric or my side of my piece when we're getting ready to do some seaming, and it's just always much more efficient if you already have a tail handy. So let me give myself enough tail to do my cast on plus extra, and we're going to cast on 32 stitches for this ribbing portion. Again, I'm using the long tail cast on method, so let me cast on 32. All right, 32 stitches are on my needle. So now we're going to be knitting this flat. So we're just going to turn our work, having our working yarn left side of our needle. Make sure, since you gave yourself a really long tail for the seaming, make sure you grab your working yarn and not the tail. Now we're going to do just a 1-by-1 ribbing for several rows to make up for the top of our handbag here. So let's just start by knitting 1. Then we'll do a purl 1, and we'll repeat those 2 stitches, knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1 till the end of this row. Then we'll turn and do our second row of ribbing. Okay, now we will turn our work and we'll knit row number 2 of our ribbing, which is going to again be a knit 1 and purl 1, and that's going to line up our knit stitches and our purl stitches nicely for a nice ribbing. So we're going to continue this knit 1 purl 1 rows till we have completed 18 rows, okay? And that will be our ribbing, and then we'll switch to our linen stitch, which I will show you how to do next. All right, I finished the 18 rows of ribbing, and now we're ready to move on to the linen stitch. Now you'll notice that I did a couple things as well to just make our life a little bit easier. That extra long tail that we started with, I just put into a nice loose knot here just to keep that out of our way a little bit as we knit. And I also shortened or used a shorter circular needle. Still a US size 5, but just a shorter cable, as that longer cable was just kind of getting in my way. So I made it a little bit easier with a shorter cable, but still working with a US 5 size needle. Okay, so let's go to the linen stitch. It is a 4-row repeat, but it is super, super easy. Okay, so row 1 of our linen stitch is going to start with a slip stitch with a yarn in front. So right now it's in the back, but we're going to move the yarn to the front, and we're going to slip that first stitch as if to purl. So just slip it from 1 needle to the next, and with our yarn in front, that's important. And then bring your yarn back to the back where we are going to knit 1 stitch. Now we'll repeat those 2 stitches to the end of the row. So bring your yarn to the front again, slip that next stitch purlwise, yarn back to the back to knit the next stitch. Yarn to the front, slip, yarn to the back, knit. Let's do that to the end of this row. Okay, we're finishing with a knit stitch. Now we will turn our work for the wrong side row. And row 2 is just very easy. It's just going to be purl stitches for the entire row. So let's bring our yarn to the front, start with a purl stitch, and continue purl stitching all the way to the end of this row. All right, let's turn our work again and work on row 3. Now row 3 is very similar to row number 1. We're just reversing the order of the stitches. So we're on row number 1, we started with a slip stitch. Now we're going to start with a knit stitch. Then we're going to do that same slip stitch where we bring our yarn to the front and slip it purlwise. Then back to a knit stitch, yarn to the back to knit, yarn to the front to slip, to the back to knit, to the front to slip. Let's repeat that sequence to the end of this row. And then we're going to end with a slip stitch. All right, let's do the final row, row number 4, and that's the exact same as row number 2, which is just going to be purling all the stitches. So row 4 is purl all. All right, we are done with row 4. So to continue with this linen stitch, which we started here, you will repeat rows 1 through 4 17 more times, or for 72 rows. And that will complete the linen portion of this bag. Then we'll revert back to the ribbing section. So I will come back to you when we are done with this linen section. All right, so I've completed my rows of the linen stitch, which is the body of the bag. So now we are going to revert back to the ribbing that we did initially. We're going to continue with a 1-by-1 ribbing. We're going to do that for 18 rows. So let's jump into that ribbing here. We'll start with our knit 1, purl 1, and repeat that. And we'll do that for 18 more rows. At that point, we'll be done with the bag portion of the handbag, and then we'll work on seaming together the sides. So I'll see you back when I finish these 18 rows. All right, we finished the ribbing portion here. We did 18 rows, which matches the number of rows we did initially. So now we're going to do just a very basic bind off, where we're going to be knitting the first stitch, knitting a second stitch, and then passing that first stitch over the one that we just knitted. Then knitting a second one and passing that first stitch over the last stitch. And we will do this bind off for the entire row. Just make sure you are doing it fairly loosely so the bind off doesn't get too tight, and kind of pull it in. So let's bind off this entire row, and then we will start the seaming of the sides. All right, all of our stitches are binded off here. So now I'm going to, like we did with the cast on edge where we gave ourselves a really extra long tail, I'm going to do the same on the bind off edge, so we also have enough yarn to do the seaming on the one side. That just makes it much more efficient. Okay, let's pull this out and we'll get ready to seam the sides. Now this is going to, we're going to fold this together in half, just like our sample here, but we are going to be folding the ribbing part over for like a cuff on the edge. So we're going to be doing that on both sides. So normally when I would seam the edge, I would be putting the right sides together to make sure that our seam is only showing on the inside. But since we are folding this over, I do not want our seam to show on the outside. So I'm going to start by seaming the edge for this ribbing section only with the wrong sides facing. Then when we get down to the body part of the bag, we will flip it inside out and finish the seaming there. So let's take our nice long tail and thread it onto a tapestry needle here. And we are going to now seam the sides together. Now you'll see here on the edges that each side I've got a series of little bumps and stitches between these bumps. We're going to be using the stitches between the bumps here to do our seaming. That's just going to make it nice and consistent. We're going to use that on both sides all the way down. So let's start by connecting the top up here. Now we're going to go into our very first stitch right before that bump and go into the stitch on the other side that is right next to the bump. Pull that through. Now we're going to go into the next stitch between the bumps, but go back in through the previous stitch we worked on, or we put our needle through up here. Okay, so the previous stitch. Now we'll go into the next stitch between our bumps and go into the previous stitch we were just in. So that's what we're going to be doing down the whole sides, going into that next stitch and then back into the previous stitch that we just worked. Okay, so we'll do that till we get down to the end of the ribbing, and then we will flip it inside out and do the rest. Okay, now that we're done seaming that ribbing side, let's put our bag inside out with our right sides facing, and we will continue now to seam the rest of the way just in the same fashion that we did the cuff. All right, our seaming is complete on one side. Now we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side, starting with the wrong sides together to seam our ribbing section and then flipping it inside out to complete the seaming on the rest of it. So we'll do it in the exact same manner that we did on the other side. Right now that our seaming is complete on both sides, we can take the ribbing portion of our bag and fold it over for a nice little cuff top. And now we can focus on knitting the strap for the bag. So we're going to continue to use a small needle, the US size 5 needle for this, and the double strand of yarn, and that's going to make for a nice, dense, thick strap, which is what you're going to want for a purse. So let's cast on. We're going to be casting on 6 stitches to do this stitch for the purse. But like what we did earlier when we casted on for the bag, we're going to give ourselves a nice long tail. That's going to give us enough yarn at the end to be able to attach it to our bag. So always very useful to give yourself a little bit of extra tail for that. So let's cast on 6 stitches with the long tail cast on method again. 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. All right, the stitch is just a 2-row repeat. Our very first row goes like this. We're going to be taking our very first stitch and slipping it, but with the yarn in front. So with the yarn in front, slip that first stitch as if you're going to purl it. All of these will be as if you're going to purl it, just slipping it from one needle to the next. Then we're going to bring the yarn back to the back and slip the next stitch as well. Now bring that yarn to the front and purl your next stitch. Now bring it back to the back for another slip stitch, the yarn in back, slip that next stitch, and then we're going to end with 2 purl stitches. Okay, so that is row 1 of our little strap. Let's turn, and we will knit the second row, which goes like this. Very similar, but with slipping, but now with knitting instead. So the first stitch is going to be a slip stitch, but now start it with the yarn in back, slip stitch with the yarn in back, bring the yarn in front, slip the next stitch with the yarn in front, bring it back to the back for a knit stitch, bring the yarn back in front for another slip stitch, and now back to the back to knit the final 2 stitches. Okay, so that is our 2-row repeat. Let's do that one more time together. There's a lot of slipping and a lot of moving of the yarn around. So let's do our row 1 again with a yarn in front. We're going to slip the first stitch, move it to the back to slip the second stitch, move it back to the front to purl the third stitch, back to the back, another slip stitch, and we'll end with 2 purl stitches. All right, let's look at row 2 one more time. With row 2, we are going to, with the yarn in back, slip the first stitch, then bring the yarn to the front, slip the next stitch, yarn back to the back to do a knit stitch, bring it back to the front for another slip stitch, and end with 2 knit stitches. All right, so that is our 2-row repeat for the strap. Now I did my strap for my sample, I did it for 34 inches, and that was long enough for like a crossbody type strap. For the handbag, if you'd like to have a smaller strap, you know, just make it shorter. So however long you'd like it for your handbag, just kind of measure as you go. So I'm going to do this for 34 inches, then we're going to come back and we will talk about how to attach it to the top of your bag. All right, I've completed the strap for our purse, and now we can attach it to the top of our bag. Now, when I bound off this strap here, I also gave myself a nice long tail. So we've got a tail at the bind off edge and the cast on edge to attach it to our bag. Now you can do this in a couple different ways. For my sample here, I use some D-rings to attach it, and I'm going to use a crochet hook to attach the D-ring to the bag and to the strap. Now if you don't have D-rings or don't want to use that, you can just simply sew the strap onto your bag. So just put your strap to the very inside of the top flap, and then just take a darning needle, thread your tail onto your darning needle, and just do some stitches to attach the bag to the top of attach the strap to the top of your bag. So that would be the simplest way, but I am going to show you how to use the D-rings to attach it today. It's a little bit more complicated, but easy to do. I'm going to use a crochet hook to do so. I found that that's the easiest way to kind of maneuver around the D-ring. So let's get started on getting these attached. First, we're going to attach the D-ring to the inside of the top of our bag, one on each side. And here's how we're going to do that. We're going to take some new working yarn, and we're going to identify at the very edge of our seam, identify just a few stitches down where we're going to want to attach our bag, or our strap, excuse me. So let's just go for a couple stitches down. We're going to do about 4 or 5 or 6 stitches along here to attach it. We're going to just insert our hook into one of the stitches below the top, grab our new working yarn and bring it through that stitch we just picked up with our crochet hook. Now let's set our tail over here to the right and take our working yarn, and we're going to take our D-ring, place it right between our working yarn and our crochet hook, and we'll just grab that yarn through our ring and then through the stitch we picked up from our bag. You might want to pull that a little bit tighter. Okay, Now we're going to go to our next stitch on our bag. We're going to go through and pick up another stitch right next to the first, and we're going to go underneath the ring this time and pick up that strand there and go through this loop that we picked up here and the first loop, or that last loop there on our hook. Okay, so now we've gone underneath. Now we're going to kind of finish that stitch by going through the D-ring, picking up that strand of yarn and going through that loop that's on your hook. All right, let's go into the next stitch right next to this one here, somewhere around the bag. Just keep it kind of in line. Go underneath your ring, grab that yarn, bring it through the stitch and through the loop on your hook. And complete that by going through the middle of the ring, grabbing your yarn and going through that loop. Okay, so let's do that a couple more times to secure it nicely. Pick up a stitch from your bag, grab your yarn underneath your ring and through the stitch, and then we'll do it through the top of the ring. Let's do it one more time. Okay, so now we've secured our D-ring to the top. We can now snip this off, pull that all the way through your last stitch, and we will weave in these ends a little bit later. So we're just going to do that exact same thing on this side for our next D-ring, and then we'll attach the straps. All right, we've got both rings attached to the top of our bag, so now it's the time to attach our strap. So remember, we've got a nice long tail to both ends of our strap to help with this, so that's the yarn that we're going to use in order to attach. So we're going to kind of hold the strap to the front of our ring here. We'll take our crochet hook again, and we're just going to go into the very edge stitch of our strap. We've got our yarn line over top of our ring, and we'll just go through the ring, grab that loop, grab that yarn, and go through that stitch we picked up on the edge of the strap. And that just kind of initially attached it there. Now we'll go over top of our ring and just bring it through the loop from the top. Now let's go into our next stitch on our strap and go underneath our ring and bring that yarn through that stitch and through the hook on our needle, or the loop on our needle. Now our yarn is underneath our ring, so now we'll go over top of the ring to bring that yarn through. We'll go into our next stitch, go through the ring, grab that yarn, and through the loop on our hook, over top, bring it through, next stitch, through the hook, or through the ring, bring it through, and through the loop on our hook. And we'll just do that all the way till we've got all the stitches connected with the ring. All right, you can pull that tail through the stitch completely. Looks like I had plenty of tail to work with there, and now we've got that attached to the ring as well, and we can weave in this long tail when we're done. So we're going to do that exact same thing. Make sure our strap isn't twisted. We'll do that exact same thing on this side with this ring, using the tail from our bind off edge, the same way we did it for the other one. All right, we've got our straps attached, our ends are weaved in, and our bag is complete. I hope you give this project a try. It is really a great, fun spring or summer type knitting project, really basic and simple to do. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe so you'll receive notifications of future videos all about knitting tips and techniques, and crocheting too. Thanks for watching, everybody. Happy knitting.